Hello gamers, Powered Hill here, and today we're going to be talking about boosting in World of Warcraft Classic. So I've been wanting to talk about boosting for quite a while on this channel. There's just been so many other things to kind of discuss, and now this is like the perfect opportunity to talk about boosting. Why? Well, it seems as if they're nuking boosting from orbit with the Burning Crusade anniversary. So Blizzard released a post about, I would say, 4 to 5 days ago, where they, discuss all the changes that they're making for TBC Anniversary, and boosting was something that was highlighted. And this video is not going to be about discussing all the minutia of the changes, so like which classes can maybe still boost, where can they still boost, things of that nature. It seems pretty comprehensive, although it does seem like there's some instances in which you can still boost, but it seems like they're trying to basically eradicate a lot of it, but as much as they can. So we're going to be talking about things from a more philosophical perspective. Like, should you boost? Is it good for the game? Is it bad for the game? Things of that nature. And we're going to talk a little bit about the timing, about things that just happened, the TBC boosting nerfs, because people have been talking about that, and I wanted to kind of weigh in there. So we'll start with the timing. And the whole kind of drama about the timing is that obviously, since we're getting the Burning Crusade anniversary soon, Blizzard has released boosts for that in order to help catch people up with their friends. So the idea is you can boost a character to level 58. And this is something that they normally do, but last time Burning Crusade had come around, the anti-boosting changes were not in the game yet. These came into the game around the end of the Burning Crusade, people have been saying. So it's a bit of an interesting choice, right? And people are thinking, well, obviously they're just trying to make more money via the boost that they're selling. But it's interesting because they didn't do this the first time around, and it could just be kind of an evolution of greed, right? Or it could be, coincidentally timed where they're planning on taking its stance against boosting, and they're going to do it anyway, and this is just an advantageous time for them to do it. Or there's kind of another theory that I've heard where the version of the game that they're using for the Burning Crusade anniversary already had the boosting changes in it, so therefore, it's just easier for them to do it that way. They don't want to make changes, and that's why we're getting the boosting kind of earlier. Now, a lot of people have been roasting Blizzard for this because obviously people are thinking like, well, yeah, obviously, you're just nerfing boosting so that everybody has to pay you for the boost. And to me, I don't know, I think that this wouldn't be bad if there were certain parameters in place. And I haven't actually looked into this, but the way that I see it is as follows. If you're only allowed to boost like one character per account, this isn't really that bad, in my opinion. Because I like the idea of them having the Burning Crusade boost, so that the idea is if you're kind of like a new player, you can kind of hop into the Burning Crusade right away with your friends. You pick a character, and you just kind of go in, get boosted to level 58. Now you can play Outland with your friends, because it's a long and arduous journey to level in WoW Classic, and the Burning Crusade kind of acts as almost like a soft reset of the game anyway. So I don't think it's really that detrimental to allow somebody to boost a character to play with their friends. Obviously, if you're allowing people to just pay for character slot after character slot that you can get boosted to 58, then that's pretty suspicious, right? Because now, what is your philosophical? What are the underpinnings philosophically of you deciding to do that, right? And then not allowing it in the game. It's just weird at that point. So at that point, it kind of becomes sus. I haven't really looked into the details there. But I think as long as they're doing like one per account, it's not really that bad. And they could even go a little bit further with this if they wanted and make it so that like if somebody hasn't played on the account in a while and they don't have any 60s, they can boost. But if you played on the account, more recently, if you already have 60s on Classic, then maybe you can't boost or something like that. Because otherwise kind of everybody's going to get a free, well, not free, they're going to have to pay for it, but they might get an additional level 58 character, which can be sort of powerful. That's kind of here nor there. I'm a little bit looser on that restriction, but again, I don't think it's the end of the world concept-wise to allow the boosting in between expansions like this, because there is the soft reset anyway. That being said, that's not the real topic of the video. Right? The real topic of the video is kind of boosting in-game in the server. And I figured it'd be a good way to kind of start talking about that by talking about if I have ever boosted before. And I have. I actually boosted this rogue, I believe. I farmed gold on my priest, then I boosted my rogue, and I boosted characters in the past in 2019 and things of that nature. And you may be asking, well, why are you doing that, right? Because I've made it pretty known, even though I haven't gone into detail on this channel, that I'm anti-boosting. So why are you boosting characters if you're, anti-boosting? That's pretty hypocritical, right? And from my perspective, it's just a matter of if you're going to allow it in the game, then I'm going to take advantage of it, because if I'm not taking advantage of it, other people are, and it's putting me at a competitive disadvantage. I don't think it's a good thing that we have boosting, but since it's here, I'm definitely going to use it because it's just super, super effective. And this leads me to my first point about why boosting is actually so harmful for the game. And this is that it is just like one of the most efficient activities you can do, okay, when you're trying to get a new character. And this could be a new character for a profession specifically. It could be a new character that you want to play. It could be a new mage to farm gold. So there's kind of a lot of avenues you could go with this, right? Where, some people are just boosting to play another character they haven't played before. Other people are boosting to unlock even more profit down the line. And no matter which way you take, which path you're taking, boosting just is hyper efficient. And we'll kind of get into why, right? So first of all, the quickness of the leveling speed and the fact that it's kind of done in an instance. If your character is properly boosted by people who are not dying, you can hit level 60 incredibly fast. Probably substantially faster than you'd be able to normally out in the world. Now, you can do some really great runs, 1 to 60, even 1 to 60 fresh, so no twin gear or anything like that. You can get the time down pretty fast. I think there's actually a hardcore fresh run where somebody has a warrior leveled to 60 in like 3 days played. Right, so it's not impossible to, have I don't want to say necessarily competitive time, because properly boosted would still be better than that, but a somewhat competitive time by just playing the game normally. The problem is you need kind of ideal conditions, and hardcore server, ironically, despite the fact that if you die, it's permadeath, so you can't do things like death skips and things of that nature. A lot of the other things are kind of going in your advantage, right? There's not that many people playing on the server at this particular point in the game, or when those runs were done, most likely. And, you don't really run into any problems with the questing or anything of that nature. So I would say that the time, even though technically, you can actually come somewhat close with like a highly optimized leveling route, it's still not even really a contest if it's properly boosted. The reality is just that most people, when they're making a character and they're boosting it, they're not necessarily trying to hyper optimize the boosting process like somebody would be if they're trying to do a speed run of leveling 1 to 60. So it's not really fair to do a comparison there. So the efficiency is the number one thing. But the second part, I think, is a very underlooked part of boosting, and that is the utility that's provided from being able to almost be completely AFK. And this is the real kicker for me that makes it like super bad. Because now, even if you're trying to argue that like, oh, you can get somewhat close time, if you just really know what you're doing in the game, you don't need to boost, you're a noob if you boost. Well, yeah, but even if we take that time on the warrior, that's like, what did I say? It was like 3 days and so many hours played. Imagine having 3 actual days of in-game game time back to yourself that you can just do anything you want in the game in. Because obviously what you can do, and what most people do, is they will take a character that's on a different account from their main, unless they need it to be on their main. Then you wouldn't be able to do this. But in most cases, people are putting characters on different accounts. And they will be able to play their main while they have their alt getting boosted. In some cases, I've seen people boosting multiple characters at once on different accounts, or playing multiple characters at once while getting boosted. So the just efficiency that you lose by leveling the character normally is insane, because you're basically able to continue to do everything you were doing at level 60 while you have this other character waiting in the wings that's kind of coming up in levels. And that opportunity cost is just something that you can't replace. That the idea is that normally, if you're playing by the normal rules of the game, and you have to hand level all your characters, there's advantages you get from leveling another character, right? Like, for example, you have a whole nother set of profession cooldowns, potentially, right? This can be really powerful, especially if you level up multiple characters. But there's an opportunity cost, and every time you're leveling up a character, you're not doing things on your main, right? So this obviously goes completely out the window when boosting is involved, because you can very easily continue to do whatever you want on your main, while also getting all the normal effects, while also getting a very quick, 1 to 60 on your boosted character. So I think those are the two main problems that I have. And realistically, the boosting is just so good that it actually does kind of outpace, for those two reasons combined, any other potential leveling process. This is not like the hardcore. If any of you guys seen the video that I made asking for dungeon leveling in hardcore, a lot of people have tried to make the argument that, the reason why we shouldn't have dungeon leveling in hardcore, or some people have made the argument that we shouldn't have dungeon leveling whatsoever, is because dungeon leveling is vastly superior to leveling in the open world and questing. And that is simply not really true in most cases, especially because that's more of an active activity, and it's a lot harder to have a group of 5 get right than a group of 1. So in the case of the boosting scenario, right, only one player needs to be kind of doing all the activity in the instance, whereas when you're dungeon running, you need all 5 players to be participating to some degree to even have the run go well to begin with, to have it be competitive. And even then, unless you're talking about something like AoE, or sorry, not AoE, but Spell Cleave in particular, with a priest and a bunch of mages, the leveling speeds are very comparable for like somebody who actually knows what they're doing in leveling a character in game versus people who are kind of dungeon running together. And if you don't have a optimal dungeon group, at that point it becomes even more worth it to kind of just quest or grind or do whatever in the open world, because doing dungeons with a suboptimal group that doesn't really have much synergy together is not really anywhere close to like the fastest leveling time that you are going to get. So there's a big difference there in terms of how much better boosting is than other things. And then kind of a side aspect of this is that it does take people out of the world, and this is not the main concern for me, because I'm okay with allowing people to kind of decide to do dungeons if they want, things of that nature, right? We talked about this in the other video, the hardcore video. However, since boosting is doing so much harm anyways, right? It's probably good that we take care of it, and then as a consequence of that, at least some of those people will be back in the open world, which is always nice. So the open world aspect is not the primary concern for me, but it's kind of like a nice benefit of, if we deal with boosting, we will have inevitably just more people back into the open world. Now, there's something that always comes up when I talk about boosting, and it tends to be that, and this is going to kind of lead into the next part of the problem, right, where not only is it the best thing for the player that's getting boosted, but it's pretty much the best form of gold per hour you can possibly have in the game if you're the mage or whatever doing the boosting. And I think this is a problem. Personally, this is why I dislike most player services, because once you get to a point where you're leveraging your services, whether this be an actual character boost or like an arena carry in the Burning Crusade or something like that, the moment you start doing this, it just becomes the only thing that you should do for gold. Like, there's nothing else that can even kind of compare to these, obviously, because it allows you to leverage a unique skill. And obviously, like in real life, this can be great, right? Because everybody wants to make money as easily as possible so they can do the things they like. But it confuses me in the game, because it's kind of like, the whole game is kind of like a challenge and a puzzle in itself. And we're like blatantly skipping a bunch of pieces of the puzzle or parts of the puzzle. If we're just boosting 24/7, whether it be in Maraudon or whether we're boosting Arena or something like that. And I feel like a lot of the times, even if you do like the activity, it can feel kind of trapping to yourself, And this is why I talk about GDKP all the time, where I like healing in raids, but sometimes I just like going out into the open world and farming or something of that nature. And it just seems like such a waste of time to go out into the open world and farm when you make so much more money from doing a GDKP. And it's kind of a similar thing. Like if I was doing arena carries in the Burning Crusade for gold, I like PvP, so there's a positive there, but the downside is that, first of all, I'm kind of playing in a bracket where I'm kind of smurfing in to begin with, which might be entertaining at first, but over time would lose novelty. And then if I want to do something more chill on any given day, I don't really... The disparity in terms of doing the chill thing and doing the boosting is a chasm, usually in terms of profitability. So this tends to be, another problem as well that comes up with things like player services in general. Now, this also extends to other things that I wouldn't exactly classify as boosting. So, for example, instance farming is very similar to boosting. Like, instance farming is sort of like boosting without the players in it, right? So you're not getting the additional wealth from the players, and in some cases, boosting is combined with instance farming. Like Strat is a good example where, a mage is basically going in there. You can't loot for the most part, I'm pretty sure, in most Strat runs, and they're killing the mobs, they're looting the mobs, and they're getting the booster's cash. So now we've taken something that's already insanely profitable and lucrative, like boosting, and we've just turned the dial up to 11, even more gold per hour. And then on top of that, the rate at which these people find BOEs is just way, way, way faster than, the average population. And even if you're comparing it to something like, maybe like a hunter could go out into parts of the world and they could like solo farm some elite mobs or something like that. Like, I'm not really sure what hunters can do in terms of the open world, but let's say maybe they were farming like eyes or something for the priest quest. Like, even something like that, the amount of time they would have to spend killing each individual mob when you factor in the drop rates or something like that, it's going to be nothing compared to the mage boosting. So even amongst other classes, which are really good at doing, or really good at soloing things in the world, mages or whatever characters doing the boosting at a given time, paladins and for some versions of the Burning Crusade and stuff like that, they just become the most efficient by far, right? And nobody else can really compete with them at all. And something that I often hear is about this as like a kind of like a criticism or a counterpoint, I guess, is that, well, at least the boosting activity requires skill, right? It doesn't really take any effort to go out there and farm herbs or something like that. Now, I would contest this. I have like a lot of strategies that I've optimized and put a lot of thought into. A lot of places where I optimize, I have kind of like a tier list of places where if one place is, saturated, I go to another place. I have specific routes I've developed for every place. So everything is very intentional and planned out. So, I do think there's a difference between farming optimally and farming suboptimally, both in terms of your strategy overall and your execution. But I can understand what they're saying a little bit. Like, no matter what you're kind of doing in the open world farming herbs, unless you're kind of PvPing over Black Lotus, which does happen occasionally, but it's more of a rarity, you're not really investing the same amount of effort playing your character, for the most part, as you are when you're doing something like dungeon boosting. Again, the preparation, definitely counts in there, but we're talking about kind of the gameplay for this aspect. And people are basically like, well, since they're, investing more of their actual skill into the game doing this boosting, whether it be we're boosting players in PvP in the Burning Crusade, or whether we're boosting people in dungeons and we're learning all the pulls and things of that nature, since they're taking the time to do that, and it does require some level of skill, not everybody can do it, why don't we leave these people alone, right? Because the idea is that, if they want to take a more active approach to their farming, then they should be rewarded, right, with, even greater riches, essentially. The problem I have with this is that if you've seen my other video where we talk about, harder difficulty shouldn't always mean a greater reward. It's the very similar concept here, where, you can't really have a system where you can just allow people to scale their skill infinitely in these games in order to gain financial benefits from it, because what it will allow is ultimately is just people to completely dwarf the rest of the scene. So think for a moment you had something like the Brawlers Guild, and let's say that, you know, after you get past a certain point in the... I'll kind of explain that because you guys might not know what that is, but it's a thing in retail where you kind of fight like bosses solo is the idea, and they basically get harder and harder and harder. So imagine you have something like this in Classic, and, you know, after you get to like the 20th boss or whatever, they get really, really hard. And, you know, somebody who's maybe really, really good at the game can push to like 30 or 40 or something of that nature. And, you know, below 20, where most people can farm or play, you get barely any gold. It's not even really worth doing this activity. You might as well go do dailies or something in whatever version of the game it is. But once you get above 30, or, you know, you're in the 30 to 40 range, you're getting tons of gold for every boss kill you do in this, right? And you're just becoming insanely rich. And yeah, you know, you are leveraging your skill to make a lot of money, and that's kind of cool in a way, right? But ultimately, it's just going to destroy the game, right? Allowing people to leverage their skill to this degree to just completely dwarf the amount that anybody else in the game is making. So we have to kind of cap this off somewhere, and I'm a favor of just kind of not allowing these type of services in general, even though they harm me, right? So, like, for example, I would have a better financial situation in the game if these things were allowed, but I think it's better if we actually do cap them out. It's just better for the game overall, better for the casual player base, because you don't want the gap between your kind of like most knowledgeable, most hardcore players and your kind of casual players to be this crazy, right? There's obviously always going to be a gap because MMOs are about progression, but, you know, you have to maintain and control the gap to some degree. And, you know, speaking of somebody who these things would benefit, I still don't think we should have them in the game. So that's kind of my thing, is we can't just let people scale their wealth infinitely by leveraging their skills in the game. And kind of moving on to the last part of this, where we're going to talk about what can Blizzard do in the future. And this is kind of where we get into the weeds a little bit. We're not going to talk about the specifics of the Burning Crusade, but they're already kind of having problems with this in the Burning Crusade is what it seems like, so it's kind of a good place to begin talking about it, where it seems like they haven't quite eliminated all the boosting methods with this new change that they've made. And this is going to be a problem going forward into Classic Plus as well. I have a feeling they're going to try and maintain the, you know, anti-boosting, no boosting environment for there. And I think, honestly, in order to really tackle this properly, it's going to need to be a really hands-on approach that they are monitoring very closely. So, you know, for the most part, because we don't really have an expectation of boosts not being allowed, the changes that they're making to the Burning Crusade are probably going to be mostly fine. Okay, there may be some things that kind of slip through. Paladins can still boost in like slave pens and things of that nature, and that might be okay. But if you actually wanted to make a version of the game where you don't have any of this boosting whatsoever, it's going to be really hard on the kind of other player surfaces side, so like things like arena boosting and things of that nature, right? But in terms of instant boosting, you just have to be really aggressive, because any of these blanket changes you're going to make, it's very likely that there's going to be a lot of oversight on your part, and you're going to forget something that can kind of happen. And players are very creative, very resilient, and especially when they want to kind of min-max the amount of gold they can make, or DPS they can pump, healing they can pump, whatever, they'll find just about any way, and they'll look through everything possible to make things happen. So, especially if we're going into something like Classic Plus, where there's going to be a lot of new novel things in the game, presumably, Blizzard is going to have to come out with a kind of a plan to tackle boosting in that. But then they're also going to have to kind of be constantly assessing the problem and making kind of live updates. Like, there may be something that a mage player finds out to circumvent, certain anti-boosting mechanics, and they have to be able to see that, recognize that, and, completely shut that down immediately with hotfixes and things of that nature if they want to stay on top of this. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to really deal with it in a reasonable or timely manner. And if you let these things go on for too long, then you do have kind of the economic ruin that comes with it, right? Where if it takes you 2 months to fix the problem, now this mage and all the other mages like him, or paladin, or whoever it is, has brought in tons and tons and tons of gold into the game, like raw gold, right? And caused a decent amount of inflation. So yeah, they need to be really good about that. And it also, ironically, or maybe not so ironically, would have a positive effect on the bots too, to like remove boosting, like a positive or negative effect on the bots, sorry. Because I think some of the most dangerous and damaging bots probably are the instance farming bots, right? Because a lot of the other bots can at least be kind of messed with in the open world and things of that nature. But if you have a mage bot in Stratholme, they're just farming gold and gold and gold and gold. What's stopping that at the end of the day? And it just goes for 24 hours straight, or however long it goes to avoid detection, then logs off, then comes back on. So doing something to really, really clamp down on, even instance farming at the high level, and then, boosting by extension, could go a long way to not just solve the problems that we talked about in this video, but also some of the RMT problems and the botting problems. So yeah, they're going to have to figure out some way to do that. They can probably use things like AI/automated tools, I would assume, to maybe track how many things people are killing in the instance, if they're in the instance alone, things of that nature, and then figure out ways to, to combat this type of boosting. So thank you guys for watching. If you like this, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. See ya.